In the autumn of 1885, beneath the towering pines of Wyoming Territory, a single gunshot shattered the stillness at Fort Bridger, followed by dozens more. By sunset, the elaborate wedding preparations that had taken months to arrange were nothing but scattered flowers and abandoned decorations across the blood-soaked parade grounds. What should have been a joyous union between Boston-bred Catherine Blackwell and Lieutenant James Harrington became instead the Fort Bridger Massacre, a day that would forever change the uneasy peace between settlers and the native tribes of the Wind River Valley. Everyone present at the fort that day perished in what newspapers would later sensationalize as an act of unprovoked savagery. Everyone except 24-year-old Catherine Blackwell, who by some miracle of fate had spent the morning in the eastern foothills collecting wildflowers for her bridal bouquet just hours before the attack. When Chief White Eagle of the Eastern Shoshone discovered the lone woman wandering in shock along the Little Snake River, her white dress muddied and torn, he faced an impossible choice: return her to the surviving military forces who would demand retribution against his people for a crime they didn't commit, or take her into the hidden valleys where no white woman had ever been permitted to enter. This is the extraordinary true story of how two people from worlds designed to destroy each other formed an unbreakable bond that would change the course of relations between natives and settlers throughout the Wyoming Territory. Catherine Blackwell never intended to venture so far from the fort that morning. "Don't wander beyond the perimeter, Miss Blackwell," Captain Forrester had warned her repeatedly since her arrival from Boston 3 months earlier. "The wilderness harbors dangers a city-educated woman cannot possibly comprehend." But on that crisp September morning, as final preparations for her wedding to Lieutenant Harrington were underway, Catherine spotted a patch of brilliant blue columbines on a distant hillside, flowers that would perfectly complement the pressed lavender sprigs she'd carried all the way from her mother's garden in Massachusetts. Without thinking, she slipped away from the bustle of the fort, following the meandering path toward the eastern ridge. "I'll be back before anyone notices," she promised herself, her gloved fingers clutching the small, leather-bound copy of Whitman's Leaves of Grass that her father, a professor at Harvard, had given her as a farewell gift. "Just a few blossoms to complete my bouquet." The wildflowers led her farther than she intended, over several rolling hills and into a sheltered valley where a crystal-clear stream cut through meadows still lush despite the approaching autumn. When Catherine finally realized how far she'd wandered, the columbines gathered in her basket, the fort was no longer visible behind the ridgeline. That's when she heard the first shot, its sharp report carrying clearly across the open landscape. Then came the screams. Catherine froze, her heart hammering against her corseted ribs. More gunshots followed, so many she couldn't count them, along with the terrified whinnying of horses and shouts in languages she didn't understand. Despite every instinct telling her to run back to find her fiancé and the safety of the forts, walls, something deeper kept her rooted in place. Her father's words from their last conversation echoed in her mind. "If there's ever trouble in that wild country, seek shelter and observe before acting. Rash decisions get people killed on the frontier." With trembling legs, Catherine descended into a small ravine and concealed herself beneath an overhanging embankment that had been carved out by spring floods. She curled against the earthen wall, clutching her book and flower basket, their familiar weight providing little comfort as gunfire continued to echo across the hills. The shooting lasted for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. Then came a new sound, war cries and whoops that every settler on the frontier had been taught to fear. Catherine didn't move, even as the September sun began its descent, and the temperature dropped with the approach of evening. Still, she waited, hoping to see soldiers from the fort searching for survivors. They never came. By dusk, Catherine's fear had transformed into a numb, hollow feeling. Cautiously, she emerged from her hiding place, her blue calico traveling dress stained with dirt, her carefully arranged chestnut hair falling in loose strands around her pale face. She climbed back up the ridge and looked toward Fort Bridger. What she saw would haunt her dreams for years to come. The fort, which had housed nearly 70 people, soldiers, officers, their families and staff preparing for what should have been a joyous wedding celebration, was in flames. Black smoke billowed against the darkening sky, and even from this distance, she could see bodies scattered across the parade ground. There was no movement, no survivors calling for help. Catherine sank to her knees, too shocked even for tears. Somewhere in that scene of carnage was Lieutenant James Harrington, her fiancé of 6 months, a man she respected if not passionately loved, who had promised her a life of purpose teaching at the fort's newly established school for both settler and native children. Gone too were Chaplain Morris and his wife, who had welcomed her so warmly, young Private Reynolds, who blushed whenever she spoke to him, and the Cheyenne translator Yellow Bird, who had been teaching her rudimentary phrases in his language. For hours she sat paralyzed, unable to comprehend what she should do next. Boston was over 2,000 miles behind her. The nearest settlement, Green River, was a 4-day journey through wilderness she had no skills to navigate. The sun had fully set, leaving her in darkness broken only by the distant glow of the burning fort. Thirst and cold finally drove Catherine to action. She remembered the stream she'd crossed earlier. Water first, then shelter, then perhaps a plan would emerge. She had just started making her way down the ridge when she heard it, the soft crunch of moccasins on gravel. Catherine dropped to her stomach, pressing herself against the cool earth. A figure appeared below, moving with the silent grace of a hunting cougar as he approached the ridge overlooking the burning fort. Unlike the soldiers Catherine had grown accustomed to at Fort Bridger, this man had copper skin and straight black hair that hung past his shoulders, adorned with eagle feathers. He wore buckskin leggings and a fringed shirt, with intricate beadwork across his chest, and a knife sheathed at his side. Catherine had heard stories about the native tribes of the region, tales meant to frighten greenhorn Easterners into compliance. "The savages will take a woman for worse than death," Mrs. Forrester had warned during Catherine's first week at the fort. But Catherine's father, who had studied native cultures extensively from the safety of his Harvard office, had insisted on a different perspective. Most tribes are fighting to preserve their way of life against our endless encroachment. The true savagery often comes from those wearing uniforms, not war paint. Now, watching the man examining the distant fort with a grave expression, Catherine wasn't sure what to believe. Was he responsible for the attack? Was he looking for survivors to kill? Or was he as shocked by the carnage as she was? The man knelt, studying the ground carefully, then looked sharply toward the ridge, directly to where Catherine lay hidden. Had he seen her? She couldn't tell. He stood and began walking straight toward her position. Catherine scrambled backward, losing her footing on the loose shale. She tumbled down the backside of the ridge, scraping her hands and tearing her dress as she fell. Landing hard at the bottom, she struggled to her feet and started to run, only to find herself facing the very man she was trying to escape. He caught her easily, strong hands gripping her shoulders. Catherine screamed and fought, dropping her book and flower basket in the struggle. "Be still," the man said in perfect, albeit accented English. "I will not harm you." Catherine continued to fight until exhaustion overwhelmed her. Only then did she notice that the man had made no move to hurt her. He simply held her at arm's length, waiting for her resistance to subside. "What is your name?" he asked when she finally stilled. "Catherine," she stammered. "Catherine Blackwell." He nodded solemnly. "I am Chief White Eagle of the Eastern Shoshone. I come from meetings with the Indian agent at Wind River." Catherine blinked in surprise. This wasn't what she expected. White Eagle released her shoulders but remained at a respectful distance. He retrieved her fallen book and offered it to her. "You were at the fort?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. She nodded, tears finally breaking through her shock. "My wedding day. I was to be married to Lieutenant Harrington this afternoon. I went to gather flowers and—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I see," White Eagle confirmed, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness that seemed at odds with the stoic set of his jaw. "The fort is destroyed. I count many dead. You alone survived." Catherine couldn't bring herself to ask if he was responsible. White Eagle seemed to understand her unspoken question. "No, this was not my people's doing," he said firmly. "The tracks and weapons tell a different story. This attack bears the mark of renegades, Broken Horn's band. They were cast out from the Cheyenne for defying peace treaties. They seek to provoke war between the white soldiers and peaceful tribes." A waterskin appeared in his hand. "Drink," he instructed calmly. Catherine took the water, suddenly aware of her parched throat. She sipped cautiously, knowing from her wilderness preparation readings that gulping would only make her sick. "What happens now?" she asked, when she'd had enough. White Eagle stood scanning the horizon. His face revealed the difficult calculation taking place behind his dark eyes. "I should take you to Green River Settlement," he said finally. "Or to the military outpost at Fort Washakie." Catherine felt a momentary relief. Civilization, people who looked like her, safety. But he continued, his voice growing grave. "But those who did this," he gestured toward the burning fort, "will have friends in both places. Some will say the Shoshone or Arapaho were responsible, no matter what tracks show. Others will want no witnesses." He knelt again, meeting her eyes directly. "And some who should protect you might not, if they learn. You saw signs that would clear the peaceful tribes of blame." Catherine felt cold, despite the exertion of her escape. "What does that mean?" "It means you are in danger, Catherine Blackwell, from more than just the wilderness." White Eagle looked toward the distant peaks of the Wind River Range that rose, like blue shadows against the eastern horizon. "There is another way," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But it would mean taking you where no white woman has ever been permitted." "Where?" Catherine asked. "To the hidden valleys of my people, to the heart of Shoshone territory." He picked up a handful of soil, letting it sift through his fingers. "My grandmother is a medicine woman among our people. She would know how to protect you until it is safe." Catherine looked back at the burning remains of everything she had expected her new life to be. There was nothing left for her there. "Will there be shelter?" she asked simply. "And food?" For the first time a hint of a smile touched White Eagle's weathered face. "Yes, the valleys provide everything we need, but the journey will not be easy, and you must do exactly as I say." Catherine clutched her book tightly. "I can do that." White Eagle nodded, his decision apparently made. He unwrapped the red and black patterned cloth from around his waist and offered it to her. First, we must disguise you. From this moment, you are no longer Catherine Blackwell of Boston. Then who am I? She asked. White Eagle considered this as he helped her wrap the cloth as a shawl around her shoulders and head, concealing her distinctively European features. For now, you are simply a woman under Shoshone protection, he said. The mountains will give you your true name when they know you better. With those cryptic words, White Eagle led Catherine toward a small copse of trees where 2 horses waited, patiently grazing. They mounted, Catherine somewhat awkwardly in her torn dress, and set off toward the distant mountains, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of her planned future, and unknowingly riding toward a destiny that would one day change the course of relations between 2 worlds destined to collide. The mountains that had seemed so close from the ridge overlooking Fort Bridger proved deceptively distant. For 3 days, White Eagle and Catherine traveled across unforgiving terrain, moving only during the cooler hours of early morning and late evening. During the scorching midday heat, they sheltered beneath overhanging rocks or in the sparse shade of juniper trees. Catherine had never known exhaustion like this. Her legs ached with each mile, and blisters formed on her hands from gripping the horse's reins. The elegant riding lessons she'd taken on Boston Common bore little resemblance to this grueling journey across wild country. Yet she never complained. The horror she had witnessed had awakened something in her, a quiet determination that seemed to impress even her stoic companion. "You have the spirit of a mountain deer," White Eagle observed. On the second evening, as they shared a small meal of dried buffalo meat and wild berries, delicate but resilient, Catherine took this as the compliment it was intended to be. "My father always said I was too stubborn for proper Boston society." At the mention of her father, Catherine's voice caught. It was the first time she had spoken of her family since they'd left the ridge overlooking the massacre site. White Eagle remained silent, allowing her the space to either continue or retreat back into herself. After a long moment, she asked, "Will I ever see them again? My parents in Boston, I mean." White Eagle poked at their small, smokeless fire with a stick. "My people believe that those who have walked on continue their journey in another world. They do not leave us entirely. They become part of the wind, the rain, the mountains. They watch over us." He looked up at the star-filled sky. "Your people have similar beliefs, do they not?" Catherine nodded. "My mother says that good people go to heaven to be with God." She hesitated, her educated mind wrestling with theological complexities. "Would your people and my people go to the same place?" Reverend Morris back at the fort said only Christians go to heaven. White Eagle's expression remained impassive, but a subtle tension appeared around his eyes. "I believe the Creator has enough wisdom not to divide families in death the way men divide people in life." This seemed to satisfy Catherine, who nodded solemnly and returned to her meager portion of food. As darkness deepened around them, White Eagle pointed to an imposing silhouette against the night sky, the first real mountain of their journey. "Tomorrow we reach the foothills of Gunfire, what your maps call Wind River Mountain. Beyond lies the heart of Shoshone territory." "Will your people be angry that you're bringing me there?" Catherine asked, remembering his earlier comment about her being where no white woman had been permitted. White Eagle's silence told her more than words could have. "Some will," he finally admitted. "Our ways forbid bringing outsiders to certain sacred places. But there are older laws than even those, laws of protection and sanctuary." He stared into the dying embers of their fire. My grandmother, Akando, is Puha Muchacho, medicine woman, who sits on the council of elders. Her voice carries great weight. She will understand why I could not leave you to die, nor deliver you to those who might wish you harm. Catherine absorbed this information, sensing the risk he was taking on her behalf. What if she doesn't understand? I mean, White Eagle's face remained unreadable as he extinguished the last glowing coal with a handful of sand. Then we will face that challenge when it comes. Now sleep. Tomorrow's path grows steeper. The next morning dawned cool and clear. As they prepared to leave their campsite, White Eagle suddenly tensed, his hand moving to the rifle slung across his back. Catherine followed his gaze and saw dust rising in the distance, riders approaching from the direction they had come. "Quickly," White Eagle urged, gathering their few belongings. "We must reach the mountain passes before they spot us." "Who is it?" Catherine asked, even as she hurried to obey. "Perhaps soldiers. Perhaps those who attacked the fort returning to hide their trail. Either would bring danger." They moved with renewed urgency, taking advantage of the broken terrain to mask their progress. Several times they heard distant hoofbeats, forcing them to take cover until the sound receded. By midday, they had reached the first granite slopes of the mountain, where the sparse prairie vegetation gave way to scattered pines and increased undergrowth. "The horses cannot follow where we now go," White Eagle explained, as he led Catherine up a nearly invisible game trail that wound between massive boulders. "And few white men know these paths." The trail grew increasingly difficult, forcing Catherine to use her hands as much as her feet to climb the steeper sections. Her fashionable traveling boots, designed for strolling along Boston's cobblestone streets, disintegrated further with each step. Just as her strength was about to give out, they crested a ridge, and the landscape before them changed dramatically. A hidden valley spread below, cut between the arms of surrounding mountains. Unlike the arid landscape they had traversed, this sanctuary teemed with life. A creek fed by mountain springs wound through meadows dotted with wildflowers, while towering pines created islands of shade. Catherine gasped at the unexpected beauty. "It's like something from a storybook," she whispered. White Eagle's normally stern expression softened slightly. "This is just the beginning of Shoshone territory. Our home lies within these mountains, hidden from those who would take it. Before you continue watching, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." They descended into the valley, following the creek upstream toward a series of tiered pools where clear water cascaded over. Smooth stones. White Eagle allowed Catherine to rest and drink while he foraged nearby, returning with a handful of berries and edible roots. "We are now in a place between worlds," he explained as they ate. "Not yet among my people, but beyond. The reach of yours. We will rest here tonight and tomorrow cross through the passage to the inner valleys, where the Shoshone make their summer camps." Catherine studied her companion's face, noting the subtle changes in his demeanor now that they had reached familiar territory. Though still vigilant, some of the tension had left his shoulders. "Why did you become chief?" she asked suddenly. "If your people hide from white settlement, why meet with Indian agents and military officers?" The question clearly caught White Eagle off guard. For a moment, Catherine thought he might refuse to answer, but he eventually settled cross-legged beside her, his expression thoughtful. 8 winters ago, the U.S. Army forced many tribes to relocate to reservations far from their ancestral lands. Many died on these journeys. My father's brother and his children were among them. Catherine remained silent, sensing there was more to the story. When those who survived were finally allowed a small portion of our homeland at Wind River, my father believed we needed to understand the white man's ways to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. He sent me to the missionary school to learn your language, your customs, your thinking. White Eagle picked up a smooth stone from the creek bed, turning it over in his palm. By becoming chief after my father's death, I walk in 2 worlds. I negotiate with your government to protect what remains of our land and ways. This knowledge shields my people. You're a diplomat, Catherine said with unexpected insight. White Eagle gave her a sharp look. Then his expression relaxed into something resembling amusement. You are more perceptive than most white women I have encountered, Catherine Blackwell. My father is a professor of cultural studies, she replied with a hint of pride that quickly faded to sadness. He always taught me to look beyond appearances. As twilight descended on the valley, White Eagle built a proper fire for the first time since their journey began. The dancing flames cast flickering shadows across the rocks surrounding their small camp. Tomorrow you will meet my people, he said, as he arranged pine boughs into a soft bed for Catherine. There are things you must understand before then. Catherine sat up straighter, sensing the importance of what was to come. First, you must never mention that I speak regularly with government officials. This is known only to the Council of Elders and a few trusted others. Catherine nodded solemnly. Second, until my grandmother determines what is to be done, you must stay close to me, or those I designate to watch over you. There are sacred places where you cannot go. I understand, Catherine said. Third, he continued, his voice growing softer, you must understand that some will not welcome you. The wounds between our peoples are fresh. Children who have lost parents to soldiers' bullets may not understand why a white woman received shelter while theirs did not. This harsh reality settled over Catherine like a heavy blanket. Maybe I shouldn't go, she whispered. Maybe I should try to reach Green River on my own. White Eagle shook his head firmly. The men who attacked the fort intended to incite war between whites and peaceful tribes. If any recognize that a woman was missing, they will be searching. Green River would be the first place they would look. He added another branch to the fire. Besides, the wilderness would claim you long before you reached the settlement. Then what will happen to me? Catherine asked, voicing the question that had hovered unspoken between them since he'd found her. White Eagle considered his words carefully before responding. For now, you will be under the protection of my family, while I investigate what happened at Fort Bridger. The army must know that renegades, not peaceful tribes, were responsible for the massacre, but you won't tell them about me, Catherine said, understanding now the complexity of his position. No, White Eagle confirmed. If the attackers have connections within the military or settlements, as I suspect, revealing your survival would put you in danger. Once I know who can be trusted, perhaps a different path will open. Catherine processed this information, her educated mind grappling with implications that would challenge most adults. How long will I stay with your people? That is for the council to decide. With my grandmother's guidance, it may be many moons before it is safe for you to return to your own kind. The reality of her situation finally broke through the protective numbness that had sustained Catherine since the massacre. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She had lost not only her fiancé and her planned future, but potentially her connection to the civilized world she had known all her life. White Eagle watched her silent crying with a mixture of compassion and awkward uncertainty. Among his people, grief was expressed differently, with ritualized mourning practices that helped channel the pain of loss. This woman's quiet tears seemed to call for a response he was ill-equipped to provide. After a moment's hesitation, he reached into a small leather pouch at his waist and withdrew a smooth stone pendant, carved with intricate symbols and suspended on a braided cord. "This belonged to my sister who walks with the ancestors now," he said, holding it out to Catherine. "She was near your age when a fever took her. Our grandmother made this protective amulet for her journey to the next world, but she did not live to receive it." Catherine stared at the pendant, momentarily distracted from her grief. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her finger over the carved symbols, "but I couldn't take something so important." "You do not take it. I give it freely," White Eagle corrected. "My sister would approve of its purpose now, to guard another." Young woman on a difficult journey. With gentle hands, he placed the cord around Catherine's neck. "The symbols represent the 4 sacred directions that guard the borders of our world. While you wear this, you are under their protection." Catherine clutched the pendant, feeling its subtle warmth against her palm. "Thank you," she said simply. "Now, sleep," White Eagle instructed, his momentary softness giving way once more to practical concerns. "Tomorrow's journey requires strength." As Catherine drifted towards sleep on her bed of pine boughs, the enormity of the path ahead weighed on her educated mind. Yet for the first time since gathering those ill-fated wildflowers, she felt something beyond fear and grief, a flicker of curiosity about the hidden world she was about to enter, and the faintest stirring of hope that she might somehow find a place within it. Creating these inspirational stories took us hours of research and writing, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dawn broke over the mountains in ribbons of gold and crimson that reflected off the hanging mists in the valley. White Eagle was already awake, returning from some early morning errand with a handful of small rainbow trout nested in a large maple leaf. "Lake fish," he explained, setting to work building a small cooking fire. "A good sign for our journey." They ate quickly, the warm protein providing welcome nourishment after days of travel rations. As Catherine helped extinguish the fire and hide their campsite, she noticed a subtle shift in White Eagle's behavior, a heightened alertness, an occasional glance toward the mountains as if expecting someone. "Are we being followed?" she asked, her own senses now attuned to danger after all they'd experienced. White Eagle shook his head. "Not followed. Expected." Before Catherine could ask what he meant, a bird call echoed from a nearby ridge. Not quite natural, containing a pattern that seemed deliberate. White Eagle immediately responded with a similar call, then turned to Catherine. "Border guards," he explained. "They watch all approaches to Shoshone territory." Within minutes, 2 men materialized from the surrounding forest with such silence that Catherine gasped in surprise. Both carried bows and wore clothing that blended perfectly with the natural environment. Their black hair was tied back with leather thongs adorned with feathers, and their faces bore expressions of careful neutrality as they assessed the unexpected visitor. White Eagle stepped forward and spoke rapidly in the Shoshone language. Catherine couldn't understand the words, but she recognized when their conversation turned to her by the way all three men's eyes shifted in her direction. One of the guards, taller than White Eagle with a jagged scar running along his jawline, stepped closer to examine Catherine. His gaze wasn't hostile, merely intensely curious, as if she were some strange creature he'd never encountered before. "Tybo Mupich," he said, using words Catherine didn't understand. "She is called Catherine," White Eagle replied in English, apparently for her benefit. She alone survived the massacre at Fort Bridger. The guards switched to heavily accented English. Why bring her here? Should take to white settlement. Those who attacked the fort were Broken Horn's renegades. White Eagle explained. They may have connections at the settlements. The woman is not safe among her own people until we know more. The second guard, who had remained silent until now, spoke rapidly in Shoshone. His tone conveyed obvious disagreement. White Eagle's response was firm and authoritative. He finished by saying, "I invoke the right of sanctuary under the law of our ancestors. I will bring her before Akando and the council to decide her fate." The mention of White Eagle's grandmother seemed to settle the matter, though neither guard appeared entirely satisfied. After a brief discussion, the taller man nodded. "We will escort you to summer camp," he told White Eagle, then turned his attention to Catherine. "You stay close, touch nothing, speak only when spoken to." Catherine nodded her understanding, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality that she was about to enter a world few outsiders had ever seen, and even fewer had been welcomed into. As they prepared to leave, White Eagle placed a reassuring hand briefly on Catherine's shoulder. "Remember," he said quietly, "you are under the protection of the mountains now." The path they followed was nearly invisible to Catherine's eyes, yet the guards moved with absolute certainty, leading them higher into the mountain range, through passages that sometimes narrowed to barely the width of a person. They traveled for hours, the landscape gradually changing as they ascended, pines giving way to fir and spruce, meadows becoming rockier and dotted with alpine flowers. Catherine had never seen before. Just when Catherine thought her legs would carry her no farther, they crested a final ridge, and a hidden world opened before them. A broad valley nestled between towering peaks, protected from harsh winds by natural stone walls. Several dozen structures were scattered throughout the valley floor. Some traditional teepees made of hides and lodge poles, others more permanent dwellings of logs and earth. Smoke rose from cooking fires and the sounds of daily life. Children's laughter, the rhythmic thud of pounding tools, the bleating of goats, drifted up to where they stood. "Dam Pokar," said White Eagle softly. "Our homeland." Catherine stared in wonder at the hidden community. From the stories she'd heard in Boston parlors and read in dime novels, she had imagined native dwellings to be primitive and temporary. What she saw instead was a well-established settlement with clear organization and purpose. Gardens, corrals for livestock, a central clearing where several older men sat in discussion. As they descended into the valley, their arrival did not go unnoticed. Activity slowed, then stopped as people turned to observe the newcomers. Children who had been playing a game with carved sticks froze in place. Women at cooking fires straightened, their expressions moving from curiosity to shock as they registered Catherine's presence despite her improvised disguise. A pathway cleared before them as they approached the center of the settlement. Catherine felt dozens of eyes upon her, some merely curious, others openly hostile. She fought the urge to shrink behind White Eagle, remembering his earlier words about mountain deer being delicate but resilient. The guards led them directly to the largest dwelling, positioned prominently at the valley's center. Before they could announce their arrival, the entrance flap was pushed aside, and an elderly woman emerged. Her silver hair was arranged in the traditional Shoshone way, her bearing regal, despite her advanced age. One look at her face confirmed her relationship to White Eagle. The same high cheekbones and intense dark eyes, though hers were now framed by deep wrinkles that spoke of a lifetime of sun and wind and wisdom. A Kando, medicine woman of the Eastern Shoshone, had been expecting them. The elder studied Catherine with eyes that seemed to penetrate straight to her core, assessing not just her appearance but something deeper, her spirit, her intentions, her very nature. Catherine fought the urge to fidget under that piercing gaze, instead meeting the elder's eyes with quiet dignity that belied her frayed nerves. A long moment passed before the medicine woman spoke, addressing White Eagle in their native tongue. Their conversation flowed back and forth, sometimes heated, sometimes measured. Though Catherine couldn't understand the words, she recognized when White Eagle was explaining her presence, defending his decision to bring her here. Finally, a Kando turned her attention fully to Catherine. "You have traveled far, Taibo woman," she said in accented but clear English, "and lost much along the way." Catherine nodded, unsure how to address the formidable woman before her. "I am called Akando," the elder continued. "My grandson tells me you are Catherine." "Yes, ma'am," Catherine replied, falling back on the manners her mother had instilled in her. "Catherine Blackwell." A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps approval, crossed Akando's weathered features at Catherine's polite response. "Come," she said, gesturing toward the dwelling's entrance. "We will speak inside, away from curious ears." Catherine glanced uncertainly at White Eagle, who nodded encouragement. "Go with her. I must speak with the council about what I found at the massacre site." As White Eagle moved toward the group of men gathered in the center of the settlement, Catherine followed Akando into the dwelling. The interior was cool and dimly lit, with light filtering through smoke flaps in the conical roof. The packed earth floor was covered with woven mats and furs in rich earthen colors. Various bundles of herbs hung from the wooden frame, filling the air with unfamiliar but pleasant scents. Akando gestured for Catherine to sit on one of the mats, while she busied herself at a small fire pit, adding herbs to a pot of simmering. "Water. You must be hungry after your journey," she said, her back to Catherine as she worked. "The mountains demand much from those who cross them." "Yes, ma'am," Catherine admitted. "But White Eagle, I mean your grandson, he made sure I had enough to eat." The elder woman nodded approvingly. "He has always possessed a caretaker's heart, even as a boy." She poured some of the herb-infused water into a clay cup and offered it to Catherine. "Drink. It will restore your strength." Catherine accepted the cup cautiously, inhaling the steam. The aroma reminded her of mint and something else she couldn't identify. She took a tentative sip and found the taste surprisingly pleasant, earthy and sweet, with a warming sensation that spread through her tired body as she drank. Akando settled across from her, arranging her long skirts with practiced grace. "Now," she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "tell me everything that happened at Fort Bridger. Leave nothing out, even details that may seem unimportant to you." Catherine took a deep breath and began her story, starting with her arrival at the fort from Boston 3 months earlier. She explained her arranged marriage to Lieutenant Harrington, a union orchestrated by her father to provide her with security after he had been diagnosed with consumption and given less than a year to live. She recounted the morning of the attack, her fortunate absence from the fort, the gunshots, the screams, and White Eagle's discovery of her the next day. When Catherine described how White Eagle had examined the tracks and declared that the attackers were Broken Horn's renegades, the elder woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did you see any of these men?" she asked. "Even a glimpse?" Catherine shook her head. "I was hiding. I only heard them." "And what did you hear? Words? Languages?" Catherine closed her eyes, trying to recall. "Shouting. Some words I didn't understand. But I also heard English. One man yelled, 'Check the commander's office.' Very clearly." This detail seemed to interest Akando. "The commander's office," she repeated thoughtfully. "Major Edwards kept valuable information there," Catherine explained. "Maps, correspondence with Washington, reports on tribal movements, and a strongbox with the fort's payroll." The medicine woman nodded slowly. "So perhaps this was theft disguised as tribal attack." "But why kill everyone?" Catherine asked, the question that had haunted her since that terrible day. "Because dead people cannot identify their attackers," Akando said matter-of-factly, "and because by disguising themselves as native raiders, these men ensure that peaceful tribes will be blamed. When soldiers come to investigate, they will find moccasin prints and arrows, and come hunting for Shoshone or Arapaho warriors who do not exist." The elder woman's directness might have seemed harsh to some, but Catherine appreciated not being treated like a sheltered society woman who needed protection from ugly truths. Her own experiences had already stripped away such pretenses. "That's why White Eagle didn't want to take me to Green River," Catherine realized aloud. "He was afraid they'd either blame his people or—" She stopped, a new understanding dawning. "Or the real attackers might find out you survived," Akando confirmed. "You are the only witness who knows the truth, that the attackers were not Shoshone. This makes you both valuable and in danger." She studied Catherine's face intently. "Tell me, child, before this happened, what did you know of the Shoshone, the people your kind call Snake Indians?" Catherine considered the question honestly. "Very little," she admitted. "I read some accounts in my father's library, mostly government reports and explorers' journals. Some described your people as primitive savages, others as noble but doomed to extinction before the march of progress." She hesitated, then added, "My father believed most of these accounts were deeply flawed, written by men who never truly sought to understand native ways." "And what do you believe now, after your time with my grandson?" "I believe my father was right," Catherine answered without hesitation. "White Eagle saved my life. He could have left me there or—" She swallowed hard. "Or killed me to keep me quiet. But he didn't. He brought me somewhere safe." Something shifted in Akando's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxing of her mouth. "And now I must decide if somewhere safe should be here, among the Shoshone." Before Catherine could respond, the entrance flap was pushed aside, and a young woman approximately Catherine's age peered in. She carried a small basket and wore her hair in 2 braids adorned with beads and feathers. Her dark eyes widened at the sight of Catherine, but she quickly composed herself and addressed Akando in Shoshone. The medicine woman responded with what sounded like instructions, and the young woman approached, setting the basket beside Catherine. Inside were a corn cake wrapped in a large green leaf, dried berries, and strips of what looked like jerky. My granddaughter, Morning Sky, Akando introduced. She is of the Water People clan, her mother's lineage. You would find it easier to call her Nimaya, her everyday name. The young woman studied Catherine with unconcealed curiosity, but remained silent. "Thank you for the food," Catherine said, addressing Nimaya directly. The young woman looked to her grandmother for translation, then responded with a shy nod before hurrying back outside, casting one last intrigued glance over her shoulder. "Eat," Akando instructed. "We have much to discuss, and the council will expect my decision before sundown." Catherine unwrapped the corn cake, its hearty aroma making her realize how truly hungry she was. As she ate, Akando explained what lay ahead. "My grandson must return to the white settlements tomorrow. His absence for too long would raise suspicion. He will report discovering the massacre, but say nothing of finding you." Catherine nodded her understanding, though the thought of White Eagle leaving filled her with apprehension. "While he gathers information about these attackers and whether it is safe for you to return to your people, you must remain here under my protection." "Your people allow this?" Catherine asked, remembering the less-than-welcoming expressions she'd encountered upon arrival. Akando's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile. "What my people allow is not the question. I am Akando, medicine woman of the Eastern Shoshone. My voice carries weight in the council, and in matters of sanctuary, my authority is rarely challenged." She leaned forward slightly. "But make no mistake, child. Your presence here breaks ancient taboos. There will be those who oppose it, those who fear what bringing a Taibo woman into our sacred mountains might mean." "I don't want to cause trouble," Catherine said earnestly. "I can try to leave if—" Akando raised a hand, cutting off her words. "The path is set. The question now is how you will walk it." The elder rose with surprising agility for her age, and moved to a stack of woven blankets in the corner of the dwelling. From beneath them, she withdrew a bundle wrapped in deerskin and brought it back to where Catherine sat. "If you are to stay among us, even temporarily, there are conditions," she said, unwrapping the bundle to reveal a simple dress made of soft buckskin, decorated with subtle beadwork along the hem. "First, you must dress as our women dress. Your Taibo clothes draw too much attention. Next," she produced a small pouch. "Second, we must darken your skin and hair. Your coloring marks you too clearly as an outsider." Catherine touched her chestnut braids self-consciously. "Will it wash away, eventually?" "Yes, though it will last many weeks, long enough for us to determine your path forward." Akando set these items aside and fixed Catherine with her penetrating gaze once more. "Third, and most important, you must learn our ways while you are here, not as a curiosity or a traveler's tale to share when you return to your people, but acknowledged to be respected." She tapped the pendant around Catherine's neck, the one White Eagle had given her. "My grandson has already marked you with protection. He sees something in your spirit worth preserving, just as I do. But others will need convincing." "How do I convince them?" Catherine asked. "By showing them that not all Taibo are enemies. By learning our language, helping with daily tasks, respecting our customs." Akando paused. "And by accepting a Shoshone name for the duration of your stay." Outside, the sounds of the settlement continued, voices calling to one another, the rhythmic thumping of tools, children playing. Normal life continued while Catherine's world transformed completely. "I will try my best," she promised solemnly. Akando nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Then from this day until you return to your people, you will be known as Maawe Naniweni." "What?" "Does it mean," Catherine asked, "wise flower," the elder translated, "for though you are schooled in Taibo knowledge, you must now bloom in new soil." Before Catherine could respond, the entrance flap was pushed aside again, and White Eagle entered, followed by two older men, whose stern expressions and decorated clothing suggested importance within the community. One of the men immediately began, speaking rapidly in Shoshone, gesturing toward Catherine with obvious disapproval. The second man, older and more reserved, watched silently, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Akando listened to the first man's apparent objections without interruption. When he finally paused for breath, she responded with just a few words, spoken softly but with unmistakable authority. The effect was immediate. The protesting man fell silent, though his expression remained stormy. The older, silent man nodded once, as if confirming a decision already reached. White Eagle stepped forward. "The council has agreed to my grandmother's proposal," he told Catherine. "You will stay here under her protection until I can determine whether it is safe for you to return to your people." "Some still object," he added with a glance toward the disgruntled man. "Running Elk believes bringing a Taibo woman into the sacred mountains invites misfortune. His concerns are not without merit, but tradition demands we offer sanctuary to those in genuine need." The man called Running Elk spoke again, this time directing his words at Catherine herself. Though she couldn't understand his language, his tone carried clear warning. "He says you must honor our ways while you are here," White Eagle translated. "Any disrespect to our customs or sacred places will end your welcome immediately." Catherine nodded solemnly. "I understand. I promise to be respectful and learn your ways." When White Eagle translated her response, the older of the two men finally spoke. His voice was deep and measured, his words few. "Sitting Bear says, you have the eyes of one who has seen too much death too young," White Eagle explained. "He believes this gives you the right to healing, regardless of your birth." With that pronouncement, both men departed, leaving Catherine alone with White Eagle and his grandmother. "It is settled, then," Akando declared. "Ma'awe Naneweni will remain under my care and instruction." She turned to White Eagle. "You must prepare for your return to the settlements. I will see to the woman's transformation." White Eagle nodded, then addressed Catherine directly. "I must leave before dawn tomorrow. The army will expect my report on the massacre, and any delay would raise suspicion." "Will you tell them about me?" Catherine asked anxiously. "No," White Eagle assured her. "As far as the white world is concerned, all who were at Fort Bridger perished in the attack. This will keep you safer until I can discover who was truly responsible." He hesitated, then added, "But I will seek news of your family in Boston. You mentioned your father was ill when you left." Catherine shook her head sadly. "Even if he still lives, he has no means to help me now. His position at the university barely supported our household. Nevertheless, I will make inquiries," White Eagle promised. "If there is anyone who should know of your survival, we will find a way to inform them once it is safe." With that, he nodded respectfully to his grandmother and departed, leaving Catherine alone with the formidable medicine woman. Akando wasted no time. "Come," she instructed, reaching for the buckskin dress. "Your new life begins now." The transformation took longer than Catherine expected. First came a cleansing ritual that involved washing in water infused with herbs and sweet-smelling roots. Akando explained that this washing away of her old self was necessary before she could properly don the clothing of the Shoshone. Next came The application of a dark paste to Catherine's skin, a mixture of walnut husks, clay, and other ingredients the elder didn't name. It stained her naturally fair complexion to a warm copper tone that, while not identical to the Shoshone women's natural coloring, was close enough to make her less conspicuous at a distance. Her chestnut hair received similar treatment, darkened, with a different mixture that Akando worked through the strands with practiced hands. "Your eyes we cannot change," the medicine woman remarked, studying Catherine's blue-green irises. "But if anyone asks, we will say your father came from a distant tribe where such eyes are sometimes seen." Finally, Catherine was dressed in the buckskin garment, which fell to just below her knees. Soft moccasins replaced her ruined boots, and her transformed hair was arranged in the traditional style of Shoshone women, braided and wrapped with colorful beads. When the process was complete, Akando led Catherine to a pool of still water at the edge of the settlement. The woman who stared back at her from the reflection was almost unrecognizable, a stranger with darkened skin and hair dressed in native garb, only her eyes remaining as a reminder of her true identity. "Now you are Ma'awe Naniwani," Akando declared. "The transformation is only skin deep, but it will allow you to move among us without drawing constant attention." Catherine studied her altered appearance with a mixture of fascination and unease. In less than a week, she had lost her fiancé, her planned future, and now even her appearance. It was as if Catherine Blackwell were truly gone, leaving only this new creation in her place. "Will I ever be me again?" she asked softly, touching the darkened strands of her hair. Akando's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You are still you, child. The outside changes, but what matters lies within." She tapped Catherine's chest, just above her heart. "This remains unchanged." As they returned to the settlement, the buzzing activity of daily life continued around them. Women worked at outdoor looms or tended cook fires. Men crafted tools or repaired structures. Children ran errands or played in small groups. Now, however, Catherine noticed a difference in how she was received. Without her obviously white clothing and appearance, the stares were less hostile, more curious. A few children even paused in their play to study her with open interest rather than suspicion. Nima, the medicine woman's granddaughter, approached, cautiously, carrying a clay water jar. She spoke to her grandmother in Shoshone, her eyes never leaving Catherine. "She asks if you are hungry again," Akando translated. "The evening meal will begin soon at the central fire." Catherine nodded, suddenly aware of how the day's events had depleted her energy. "Yes, thank you." When Akando translated this response, Nimaya smiled shyly and motioned for Catherine to follow her. "Go," the elder woman instructed. "It is time. You began learning our ways directly, not just through my words. Nimaya will show you where to sit and how to behave during the meal." As Catherine followed her new guide toward the center of the settlement, where cooking fires were being stoked for the evening meal, she felt the weight of many eyes upon her, some accepting, others still wary. Her transformation might have altered her appearance, but it had not erased the reality of her situation. She was still an outsider in a closed world, dependent on the goodwill of Akando and White Eagle for her very survival. And tomorrow, White Eagle would depart, leaving her truly alone among strangers, whose language she couldn't speak and whose customs she didn't understand. Yet as she watched Nima confidently navigate the activity around the cooking area, occasionally glancing back to ensure Catherine still followed, she felt a small spark of something unexpected. Not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor, a sense that even in this utterly foreign world, connections were possible. That night, as Catherine lay on a sleeping mat in the corner of Akando's dwelling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Shoshone settlement preparing for sleep, she clutched the leather-bound Whitman that remained her only tangible link to her previous life. Tomorrow would bring White Eagle's departure and the beginning of her immersion into Shoshone ways. Tonight, she allowed herself one final moment as Catherine Blackwell, daughter of Professor Thomas and Elizabeth Blackwell of Boston, before embracing her new identity as Ma'awe Naniweni, wise flower. Outside, a flute began to play, its haunting melody drifting through the night air. Akando, preparing her own sleeping place across the dwelling, noticed Catherine's attentiveness to the music. "Night songs," she explained, "to keep harmony between our people and the world around us, to remind us that even in darkness, beauty can be found." As the gentle notes lulled her towards sleep, Catherine realized that perhaps this, finding beauty in darkness, would be her most important lesson among the people of the hidden mountains. Dawn had barely begun to paint the eastern sky when Catherine felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. Opening her eyes, she found White Eagle kneeling beside her sleeping mat, already dressed for travel. "It is time for me to leave," he said quietly, careful not to wake his grandmother, who slept across the dwelling. "I wanted to speak with you." "Before I go," Catherine sat up, instantly alert despite the early hour. "How long will you be gone?" "2 weeks, perhaps longer," he replied. "Enough time to report the massacre, hear what the army and settlers believe about it, and make inquiries about who might have been responsible." He reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew something small that glinted in the dim light filtering through the smoke flaps. "Take this," he said, pressing a silver medallion into her palm. "Keep it hidden, but if danger comes before my return, show it to any soldier or agent. It bears the government seal and my name. They will know you are under my protection." Catherine curled her fingers around the medallion, feeling the weight of what it represented, a lifeline back to her own world if necessary. "I'll keep it safe," she promised. He nodded, then hesitated before adding, "The path before you will not be easy. My people have suffered much at the hands of the Taibo. Some will never accept your presence here, no matter how you look or act." "I understand," Catherine said, though in truth the full complexity of her situation was only beginning to dawn on her. "Learn our language," White Eagle advised. "It will open doors that would otherwise remain closed to you. My grandmother is a demanding teacher, but there is no better one." He glanced toward Akando's sleeping form. "And Nimaya, my cousin's daughter, she has a good heart beneath her shyness. Friendship with her would serve you well." With those final words of advice, White Eagle rose and moved silently toward the entrance. At the doorway, he turned back once. "Remember who you truly are, Catherine Blackwell," he said softly, "even as you become Ma'awe Naniweni." Then he was gone, slipping away into the pre-dawn darkness to begin his journey back to the settlements and the world beyond the sacred mountains. Catherine returned to her sleeping mat, but found rest impossible. Too many thoughts tumbled through her mind. Worry about White Eagle's safety, uncertainty about her own position here, and beneath it all, the still raw grief for her lost future that surfaced in quiet moments. She was still awake when Akando stirred an hour later, The elder woman seemed unsurprised to find Catherine already alert. "The day begins early among the Shoshone," she remarked, moving with practiced efficiency to rekindle the small fire in the central pit. "Your training starts now." That first day established a pattern that would define Catherine's new life. Before the sun had fully cleared the eastern mountains, she accompanied Akando to a small stream where they collected water in clay vessels. The medicine woman used this opportunity to begin Catherine's language instruction, naming each object they encountered in Shoshone and requiring Catherine to repeat until her pronunciation was acceptable. "Pa," Akando said, pointing to the flowing water. "Pa," Catherine echoed, trying to match the elder's intonation. "Tim," Akando continued, indicating a rock. "Tim," Catherine repeated. This continued as they gathered firewood, tended medicinal plants in Akando's garden, and prepared morning food. By midday, Catherine's head swam with new sounds and meanings, but she persisted, understanding that language was her first bridge to acceptance. After the midday meal, which they shared with several older women who examined Catherine with undisguised curiosity, Akando led her to a small clearing just beyond the main settlement. There, 2 upright looms stood in the shade of a juniper tree. Nima was already there, her nimble fingers working colored yarn across taut strings. "Weaving is the heart of a Shoshone woman's knowledge," Akando explained as she positioned Catherine before the second, smaller loom. "In creating the patterns passed down through generations, we connect to those who came before and those who will follow." What followed was Catherine's first lesson in an art form far more complex than the simple embroidery her mother had taught her. The traditional upright loom required not just dexterity, but an understanding of tension, pattern, and balance that challenged Catherine's educated mind. Her first attempts were clumsy, drawing occasional smiles from Nima. "Do not feel discouraged," Akando advised, when Catherine's frustration became evident. "Nima has been weaving since she could walk. Your hands will learn as hers did." By late afternoon, Catherine had managed to complete only a small section of the simple pattern Akando had set for her. Her back ached from sitting upright for so long, and her fingers were sore from manipulating the unfamiliar tools. "That is enough for today," the medicine woman declared, inspecting Catherine's work with a critical eye. "Tomorrow you will unravel this and begin again. Learning comes from doing, undoing, and redoing." As they prepared to return to the settlement, Nima approached Catherine directly for the first time. With gestures and the few Shoshone words Catherine had learned that morning, the native woman indicated that Catherine should follow her. Looking to Akando for permission, Catherine received a nod of approval. "Go. It is good for you to know others besides me, but return before the evening meal." Catherine followed Nima along a narrow path that wound between rocky outcroppings to a small meadow overlooking the valley. There, to Catherine's surprise, several young women approximately their age had gathered. They fell silent as the two approached, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to wary suspicion. Nima spoke rapidly in Shoshone, apparently explaining Catherine's presence. One woman, taller than the others with a fierce expression, responded sharply. Whatever she said caused Nima to place herself slightly in front of Catherine in what seemed a protective gesture. An older woman with intricate turquoise beads woven into her hair intervened, her tone conciliatory. After a brief discussion, most of the women resumed what they had been doing before, preparing wild plants, some grinding seeds between stones, others weaving small baskets. Nimar guided Catherine to sit at the edge of the group, demonstrating through gestures how to separate the useful parts of a particular root from its bitter outer layer. Though no one spoke directly to her, Catherine was permitted to observe and eventually to try her hand at the task. She performed poorly at first, drawing some derisive looks, but improved with each attempt. By the time the lengthening shadows indicated they should return to the settlement, she had won a small measure of grudging respect from the group. As they descended from the meadow, Nimar picked a small wildflower and offered it to Catherine with a shy smile, the first genuine gesture of friendship she had received. Though they shared no common language yet, something had shifted between them. That night, Akando instructed Catherine to sit beside her during the evening meal. At the central fire, the elder's status ensured that no one openly objected to the disguised outsider's presence, though Catherine felt the weight of scrutiny. From many in the gathering, after the meal, several elders remained around the fire, and an elderly man Catherine recognized as Sitting Bear, the silent member of the council from the previous day, began to speak. Though she couldn't understand his words, the rhythm and cadence suggested he was telling a story. The rapt attention of everyone present confirmed this impression. "He tells the creation story," Akando whispered, translating key points as the narrative unfolded. How first man and first woman emerged into this world, how the sacred mountains were placed to mark the boundaries of our territory, how the spirit beings taught our ancestors to live in harmony with all things. Catherine listened, entranced, not just by the story itself, but by the way Sitting Bear's voice rose and fell, his hands painting images in the air, his face reflecting the emotions of each part of the tale. This was storytelling as she had never experienced it, not simply words on a page or brief tales told in drawing rooms, but living history passed from generation to generation. When the gathering dispersed for the night, Akando commented, "You listened well. Many Taibo hear our stories as curious tales only, not as truth and teaching. Remember this story, for it explains why we are as we are." Over the next several days, a routine emerged. Mornings were devoted to language instruction and helping with essential tasks, gathering food, preparing meals, tending to the settlement's needs. Afternoons brought weaving lessons, which gradually expanded to include instruction in beadwork and basketry as well. In the evenings, Catherine was permitted to join Nimar and the other women, though many still kept their distance. 10 days after White Eagle's departure, Akando announced a change to their routine. "Today you will accompany me to gather medicinal plants," she informed Catherine as they broke their morning fast. "It is time you learned some healing ways." They ventured higher into the mountains than Catherine had yet gone, following game. Trails that wound through pine forests and open meadows, brilliant with wildflowers. At each stop, Akando carefully harvested specific plants, explaining their properties and uses. "This one," she said, indicating a low-growing plant with delicate yellow flowers, "eases the pain of women's monthly cycles. And this," she pointed, to a spiky-leafed bush, "reduces fever and draws infection from wounds." Catherine absorbed the information eagerly, recognizing its practical value regardless of where her future might lead. Her own mother had kept a modest herb garden back in Boston, but her knowledge had been limited compared to the comprehensive understanding Akando demonstrated. As they worked their way along a sun-dappled ridge, the medicine woman suddenly froze. Raising a hand for silence, Catherine instantly complied, having learned to read the elder's signals over the past week. A moment later, she heard what had alerted Akando, voices coming from the valley below, speaking English. They crept forward cautiously until they could peer down into a small canyon from behind a screen of junipers. Below, a group of 12. Men on horseback had paused near a stream. Their appearance immediately identified them as soldiers, blue uniforms, wide-brimmed hats, rifles slung across their backs. "Army patrol," Akando whispered unnecessarily. "They rarely venture this high. Into the mountains. Something must have brought them." As they watched, one man, clearly an officer from his bearing and the respect shown by the others, unfolded a map and gestured toward distant peaks. "Reports of smoke from multiple campfires," they heard him say as his voice carried up the ridge. "Could be nothing. Could be a summer encampment we didn't know about." Another soldier responded, his tone skeptical. "Sir, with respect, we're well beyond the reservation boundaries. If there are Shoshone up here, they're in violation of the treaty." The officer refolded his map. "After that massacre at Fort Bridger, we can't take chances. If there are hostiles in these mountains, we need to know." Catherine felt Akando's hand close around her arm like an iron band. "They search for our settlement," the elder breathed, her voice barely audible. "We must warn the others." They retreated with painstaking slowness until they were safely out of earshot of the patrol. Then Akando set a pace that challenged even Catherine's young legs as they hurried back toward the hidden valley. "Will they find us?" Catherine asked, as they half ran, half walked along a narrow trail. "Not easily," Akando replied. "The passages to our valley are well hidden and guarded, but if they are determined and have a skilled tracker—" She didn't need to finish the thought. Catherine understood the danger all too well. If the soldiers discovered the settlement, they would almost certainly force everyone to relocate to the official reservation, and in the process they would find her, a white woman living among the Shoshone, looking more native than white due to her disguise. What explanation could possibly satisfy them? Would they believe she had been rescued rather than captured? Would they accept that she stayed willingly, or would her presence provide the very excuse they needed to take action against the community that had sheltered her? These questions tumbled through Catherine's mind as they reached the valley, and Akando immediately called the council together. The urgency in the elder woman's voice brought not just the formal council members, but many others from throughout the settlement. Standing beside Akando, Catherine could understand only portions of the rapid discussion that followed her report of the soldiers' presence. But the response was clear enough. Immediate action. Women began dismantling the summer shelters and packing essential belongings. Men organized hunting parties to secure fresh meat for what was evidently to be a journey. Children were set to gathering specific plants and berries that could be carried easily. Nimar appeared at Catherine's side, gesturing urgently for her to follow. They hurried to Akando's dwelling, where the native woman began swiftly collecting the medicine woman's herbs and tools, wrapping them carefully in deerskin pouches. Catherine instinctively joined the effort, helping to roll sleeping mats and gather cooking implements. As they worked, she realized Nima was actually speaking to her in halting, broken English. "We go," the young woman said, gesturing toward the highest peaks visible from the valley. "Higher places, summer camp no more." Catherine was startled by this unexpected linguistic connection. "You speak English?" Nimar nodded. Little words. Learn from trading. Don't tell others. She tapped her chest proudly. I learn quickly. This revelation might have led to a deeper conversation had Akando not appeared at that moment, her expression grave. The council has decided, she informed Catherine. We must move to the high summer pastures earlier than planned. It is a difficult journey, especially for the very young and very old, but remaining here risks discovery. Catherine nodded her understanding. Because of me? She asked, voicing her deepest fear. Are you leaving because I brought danger? Akando considered the question with characteristic directness. Not because of you alone, she said finally. The soldiers would search these mountains regardless because of the Fort Bridger massacre, but your presence makes discovery more dangerous for all. She placed a weathered hand on Catherine's shoulder. Do not carry blame, that is not yours. The real fault lies with those who attacked the fort and with a government that restricts where the Shoshone may live, on their own ancestral lands. The elder woman's gaze sharpened. Now we must prepare you for the journey. The high pastures are colder, the air thinner, and there is something else you should know. We may be gone for many weeks, perhaps months, but White Eagle expects to find us here. When he returns, Catherine pointed out with sudden alarm, how will he know where to look for us? I have sent a messenger to a place where my grandson sometimes stops on his way back from the settlements, Akando explained. If the spirits favor us, he will receive word of our movement before reaching the empty valley. She began inspecting the items Nimar had packed, adding and removing things according to some internal calculation of need versus portability. You will need warmer clothing, she noted, and sturdier moccasins for the rocky paths ahead. As Akando turned her attention to these practical matters, Catherine caught Nimar's eye. The native woman offered a small, encouraging smile. Together, she said in her limited English, reaching out to touch Catherine's arm briefly. Not afraid. The simple gesture carried profound meaning, not just sympathy or even friendship, but a recognition of shared circumstance. Both women faced an uncertain journey ahead. Both had reasons for apprehension, yet neither would face these challenges alone. By nightfall, the settlement had been transformed. Most portable structures had been dismantled, their components either packed for transport or carefully hidden. What couldn't be moved was stored in concealed caches that blended seamlessly with the landscape. Even the most obvious signs of human habitation, fire pits, cleared areas, trampled paths, were being systematically erased by teams of children spreading fresh pine needles and arranging rocks to look naturally placed. If the soldiers find this place, Sitting Bear explained through Akando's translation, they will see only an abandoned camp from seasons past, nothing to suggest recent use. The evening meal was abbreviated, with families eating quickly from their travel provisions rather than gathering at the central fire. An atmosphere of tense anticipation hung over the community as final preparations were made for departure at first light. In Akando's dwelling, one of the few structures still standing, Catherine helped pack the last of their belongings. Her hand brushed against something metal in her small bundle of personal items, the silver medallion White Eagle had given her. She held it for a moment, considering its significance. Just a few hours ago, it had represented a potential escape route back to the world of white settlements. Now it felt like a tether to White Eagle himself, the one person who truly connected her past life to her present circumstances. "We leave at dawn," Akando announced, breaking into Catherine's thoughts. The journey will be challenging, but not beyond your capabilities." The elder settled onto her sleeping mat for the last time in this place. "Rest while you can, Ma'awe. Nanueni. Tomorrow we climb to where eagle nests and thunder speaks directly to the earth." As Catherine lay down on her own mat, Nima appeared in the doorway. She hesitated briefly, then entered and placed something beside Catherine. A small pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. "For journey," she explained in her limited English. "Keep safe things." Before Catherine could respond, the native woman had slipped back outside, leaving her to examine this unexpected gift. The pouch was finely crafted with a design that, as Akando had recently taught her, represented protection and safe travel. Inside was a single item, a small carved figure of a deer, similar to the animal White Eagle had compared her to on their journey to the Shoshone settlement. The workmanship was simple but expressive, capturing the animal's characteristic delicate strength. Catherine carefully placed White Eagle's silver medallion inside the pouch, alongside the carving, then hung it around her neck alongside the protection amulet he had given her. As she drifted toward sleep, her hand closed around both tokens, tangible reminders that even in this moment of upheaval, she was not entirely alone. Outside, a nightbird called, its voice carrying across the nearly empty valley. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new landscapes, new adaptations required of her. But tonight, for perhaps the first time since the massacre, Catherine felt something unexpected taking root within her. Not just resignation to her fate, but a tentative embrace of it. The journey to the high summer pastures began in the ethereal half-light that precedes dawn. Nearly 70 people, men, women, children, and elders, moved in practiced formation up narrow switchback trails that only those born to these mountains could follow with confidence. Heavily laden pack horses and small herds of goats accompanied them, carefully guided by experienced handlers. Catherine walked beside Akando, whose age seemed no impediment to maintaining a steady pace up the increasingly steep terrain. Nima moved ahead of them, occasionally glancing back to ensure they followed closely. The morning air held a biting chill that Catherine's buckskin dress and the rabbit fur-lined vest Akando had provided barely kept at bay. "How far do we go?" Catherine asked, her breath forming misty clouds in the cold mountain air. 3 days' journey, the medicine woman replied. "Perhaps 4, moving with the whole community and the animals. The path grows steeper ahead." She pointed toward an imposing ridge that rose like a wall across their route. "Beyond that lies Tsetogaa in your tongue, Split Rock Canyon, and beyond that the high pastures where our ancestors have summered since before memory." Catherine studied the formidable landscape ahead with a mixture of apprehension and awe. Nothing in her previous life had prepared her for terrain like this. Sheer cliff faces, narrow passages between towering rocks, trails that seemed to vanish into thin air, only to reappear around impossible bends. "Will the soldiers follow us there?" she asked. Remembering the patrol they had spotted the previous day, Akando's expression remained impassive. "Not easily. Few who are not Shoshone know the hidden paths through Tsetogaa, but the blue coats have Ute and Arapaho scouts who might. We cannot assume safety, only pray for it." As the sun rose fully above the eastern horizon, its rays illuminated the spectacular scenery through which they journeyed. Massive rock formations in brilliant shades of red, orange, and gold towered on all sides. Ancient pictographs adorned protected cliff faces, telling stories that predated even the Shoshone's arrival in these lands. Our ancestors left their marks. Kando explained when she noticed Catherine studying one such panel of ancient artwork. Not my direct ancestors, the ancient ones who lived here before the Shoshone. We honor their memory by protecting these sacred places. The day's march continued with brief rest periods that barely seemed adequate to Catherine's tired legs. Yet she never complained, determined to prove herself equal to the challenge. Around midday, they paused near a small spring for a more substantial meal, and to allow the youngest children and oldest members of the community to recover their strength. Catherine found herself seated with Nimar and several other women she recognized from the meadow, where they had prepared plants. To her surprise, their attitudes toward her had subtly shifted. Though still reserved, they no longer displayed open suspicion or hostility. One woman, perhaps a few years older than Catherine, offered her a piece of dried fruit from her own provisions. When Nimar translated Catherine's thanks, she nodded solemnly before introducing herself as Tiber, meaning sun woman. She asks if you are afraid of the high places. Nimar translated her subsequent question. Catherine considered this carefully before responding. Tell her I respect the mountains, but try not to fear them. My father taught me that fear makes difficult things impossible. When Nimar relayed this answer, Tiber's serious expression gave way to a brief smile of approval. It was a small moment, but significant, the first genuine connection Catherine had made beyond Kando and Nimar. The respite ended all too quickly, and they resumed their ascent. The afternoon brought them to the most challenging section yet, a narrow trail skirting a sheer drop of several hundred feet. Adults helped the smallest children navigate this treacherous passage, while the pack animals were led one by one with exceptional care. Catherine found herself gripping Nimar's hand for reassurance as they edged along the precipitous path. The native woman squeezed back, murmuring what sounded like encouragement in Shoshone. Despite the language barrier, the support was unmistakable. They would face this danger together. By nightfall, the community had reached a relatively flat area that offered enough space to make camp. Though everyone was exhausted from the day's arduous trek, tasks were distributed efficiently, some gathering firewood, others setting up temporary shelters, still others preparing the evening meal. "We have covered a good distance today," Kando announced as she and Catherine arranged their sleeping area beneath a simple brush shelter. "If tomorrow's pace matches it, we will reach the canyon by sunset." Catherine helped prepare a simple stew of dried meat and foraged greens, practicing the Shoshone words for each ingredient as she worked. Her vocabulary had expanded considerably over the past 10 days, though complex conversation remained beyond her abilities. As they ate around small, carefully shielded fires designed to minimize visible smoke, Running Elk, the council member who had most strongly opposed Catherine's presence, approached their group. To Catherine's surprise, he addressed her directly. In Shoshone, his expression stern but not hostile. Kando translated, "He says you have walked well today without complaint, where many Taibo would have faltered. He asks if your feet hurt as badly as your face tries to hide." Catherine couldn't help but smile at the unexpected perceptiveness of the observation. "Yes," she admitted, "but not so badly that I cannot continue tomorrow." When this response was translated, Running Elk nodded and extended a small clay pot filled with a pungent salve. "4 blisters," Kando explained, "a mixture of pine resin and herbs that heals and strengthens the skin." Catherine accepted the offering with appropriate thanks, recognizing it as more than mere practical assistance. It was an acknowledgement, however grudging, of her effort to integrate with the community. That night, exhaustion overcame even the discomfort of sleeping on hard ground beneath a hastily constructed shelter. Catherine fell into a dreamless sleep almost immediately, wakening only when Akando roused her in the pre-dawn darkness. "Today we'll test even the strongest legs," the elder warned as they broke their fast with corn cakes and dried berries. "But the path through offers wonders to those with eyes to see them." The second day's journey proved even more demanding than the first. The trail frequently disappeared altogether, requiring them to scramble across bare rock faces using handholds and footholds that seemed invisible until pointed out by their guides. Several times the entire procession halted while scouts investigated the safest route forward. By midday, they had reached the rim of Tsetogar, Split Rock Canyon. Catherine stood transfixed by the vista that opened before her. A vast chasm, carved by ancient waters, its walls adorned with countless layers of red and gold sediment. Far below, a ribbon of green vegetation traced the path of a stream that had sustained life in this arid region for countless generations. "It's the most magnificent thing I've ever seen," she breathed, momentarily forgetting her fatigue. Akando nodded in agreement. "Tsetogar is sacred to the Shoshone. Within its walls lie ancestral dwellings, places of power, and histories written in stone. It is a place where the spirit beings still walk, for those with eyes to perceive them." The descent into the canyon proved even more challenging than the previous climbs. The trail wound back and forth down the nearly vertical canyon wall, sometimes so narrow that they had to proceed single file, pressing their bodies against the rock face. As they neared the canyon floor, Catherine noticed structures built into the cliff faces, ancient dwellings tucked into natural alcoves high above the valley floor. Nanaha, Akando identified one particularly impressive ruin, built by the ancient ones who came before us. "We do not disturb such places, for the spirits of those who built them remain." By late afternoon, they had reached the canyon floor, where cottonwood trees provided welcome shade, and the stream offered sweet cold water to slake their thirst. Here they encountered another surprise, a small group of Shoshone already encamped, who greeted their arrival with evident relief. "Scouts from other family groups," Akando explained, "sent ahead to prepare the high pastures for summer use. They bring news." The news, it seemed, was unwelcome. As the elders gathered to confer with these advanced scouts, Catherine noticed tension spreading throughout the community. Without understanding the rapid exchanges in Shoshone, she could nonetheless sense that something had altered their plans. Nima confirmed this suspicion when she joined Catherine by the stream. "Soldiers," she explained in her limited English, gesturing toward the mountains they had planned to ascend the following day. Many soldiers looking for Shoshone not on reservation. "What will we do?" Catherine asked, alarmed by the implications. If the army had expanded its search, their entire journey might have been for nothing. Nimaya shrugged, her expression troubled. "Elders decide now. Maybe stay in canyon, maybe find different high place." The council's deliberations continued through the evening meal. Finally, as darkness settled over the canyon, Sitting Bear addressed the gathered community. Though Catherine couldn't understand his words, the decisive tone and purposeful gestures made clear that a new course had been determined. "We will not proceed to the usual summer pastures," Akando translated for Catherine afterward. The army has established a temporary camp too near that location. Instead, we will follow the canyon to its western arm and ascend to different highlands, places known only to the oldest among us, unused for many seasons. Is it safe there? Catherine asked. The medicine woman's expression grew solemn. Safe from soldiers? Yes. The terrain is too difficult for large groups of mounted men, and few maps show these areas. But the journey will be harder, the destination less hospitable than our usual summer grounds. She studied Catherine's face intently. The path ahead may prove beyond your experience, Ma'awe Naniweni. There is no shame in recognizing one's limits. Catherine bristled slightly at the implied suggestion that she might not be able to continue with the group. I can manage whatever path the rest of you take, she insisted. I've come this far, haven't I? Akando nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. Then prepare yourself. We leave at first light, taking only what is essential. The narrower passages cannot accommodate pack animals. That night, as the community made final preparations for the altered journey, Catherine noticed increased activity around the edge of their temporary camp. Men armed with bows moved silently into position at strategic points, overlooking the canyon floor, while runners were dispatched in various directions. Precautions, Nimar explained when she caught Catherine watching these movements, making a safe path for tomorrow. Despite her exhaustion, Catherine found sleep elusive that night. The canyon walls seemed to amplify every sound, the soft hooting of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote, the whispered conversations of guards changing positions. Each noise triggered memories of that terrible day at Fort Bridger, when similar sounds had preceded the massacre of her fiancé and everyone she had known. She must have dozed eventually, for the next thing she knew, Nimar was gently shaking her awake. The canyon was still shrouded in deep shadow, though a faint lightening of the eastern sky promised dawn's approach. "Come," the native woman urged, helping Catherine gather her few belongings. "We go first with children and mothers. Men follow, hiding our trail." The new strategy became clear as they assembled. The community would travel in smaller, staggered groups, rather than as one large, easily tracked procession. Those most vulnerable would move ahead, while those most capable of defense would protect the rear. Catherine found herself assigned to a group led by an elder woman she recognized as Nimar's mother. Akando, despite her age, had chosen to remain with the final group, her knowledge of healing arts deemed essential if conflict should arise. "Do not worry for me," the medicine woman told Catherine when she expressed concern about this separation. "Follow Tashina's guidance without question. She knows these canyons as well as anyone living." With a final adjustment to Catherine's pack, and a brief touch to the protection amulet around her neck, Akando sent her forward with the first group. They set off as the canyon began to brighten with pre-dawn light, following the streambed westward. The route proved even more challenging than Catherine had anticipated. Rather than remaining on the relatively flat canyon floor, they frequently ascended side canyons only to descend again, crossed the stream multiple times, and navigated passages so narrow they had to remove their packs and push them ahead before squeezing through themselves. By midday, Catherine's muscles ached with fatigue, unlike anything she had experienced before. Yet a quick glance around their small group revealed that even the youngest children maintained the pace without complaint. Pride and determination kept her moving forward when her body begged to rest. Nima remained close by, occasionally offering assistance at particularly difficult passages. or sharing water from her own supply when Catherine's ran low. Though they exchanged few words, their bond continued to strengthen through shared struggle. Late in the afternoon, they reached a fork in the canyon. Tashina, their guide, paused to examine marks carved into a boulder, signs invisible to Catherine, but apparently meaningful to the Shoshone woman. After a moment's consideration, she led them into the narrower of the two branches. This new passage twisted sharply between towering walls that blocked much of the day's remaining light. The air grew noticeably cooler, and the stream that had accompanied their journey disappeared underground, leaving only a dry, rocky bed. Just as Catherine began to wonder how much farther they could travel before darkness made progress impossible, the canyon opened suddenly into a hidden valley. Unlike the broader expanse of Tsetogar, this secluded basin was completely encircled by steep walls that created a natural fortress. A small spring bubbled from the base of the northern cliff, creating a pool of clear water surrounded by lush vegetation. Pianoia, Nima named the place in a reverent whisper, Moonwater, sacred place. As Catherine took in their surroundings, she noticed features that explained the name. Near the top of the eastern wall, erosion had created a perfect circular opening through the solid stone, a moon that would frame the night sky beyond. Tashina directed the group to establish camp near the spring while they awaited the arrival of the other parties. Temporary shelters were erected, a small fire pit dug, and foraging parties dispatched to gather edible plants that grew in abundance around the water source. By nightfall, 2 more groups had joined them in the hidden valley, but there was still no sign of the final party that included Akando and many of the council members. As darkness deepened, Catherine found herself growing increasingly anxious about their absence. Nima shared these concerns. "Should be here now," she said in her limited English as they sat beside the carefully shielded fire. "Too long on trail." Tashina and several other adults conferred in low voices, their expressions grave. Eventually, a decision was reached. 2 men would backtrack along their route to search for the missing group, while everyone else would remain in the valley and prepare for an extended stay. "What if soldiers found them?" Catherine asked Nima, voicing her deepest fear. The native woman shook her head firmly. "Grandmother is too clever. Maybe took different path. Maybe hiding from something." Despite these reassurances, an atmosphere of tension pervaded the camp that night. Additional guards were posted, and the children were instructed to remain close to the central area. Catherine's sleep was fitful, interrupted by both physical discomfort and persistent worry about Akando's safety. Dawn brought welcome news. One of the scouts had returned with word that the final group was intact, but had been forced to take a circuitous route to avoid a cavalry patrol that had entered the canyon system. They would arrive by midday. Relief swept through the community. Preparations for their arrival accelerated, with better shelters constructed and additional food gathered. Catherine threw herself into these tasks alongside Nehemiah, finding that physical activity helped dispel her lingering anxiety. True to the scout's prediction, Akando's group appeared shortly after the sun had reached its zenith. They looked exhausted. Their journey had clearly been arduous, but all had arrived safely. The medicine woman herself showed no sign of fatigue as she strode into the camp, immediately gathering the elders to share information. Catherine waited patiently for an opportunity to approach her mentor, helping distribute water and food to the new arrivals in the meantime. When Akando finally emerged from the council meeting, her expression was more serious than Catherine had yet seen it. "The situation has grown more complex," she informed Catherine bluntly. "The army is conducting a systematic sweep of the entire region with more soldiers than we anticipated. They carry written orders mentioning the Fort Bridger massacre specifically." Catherine absorbed this troubling news. "Are they looking for those responsible, or just assuming it was Shoshone?" "The orders we glimpsed suggest the latter," Akando replied, though some officers apparently questioned the evidence. She sank down onto a flat rock, the first sign of physical limitation Catherine had observed in the elder. "We intercepted a message meant for the commander at Fort Laramie. It spoke of a reliable witness who identified Shoshone raiders at Fort Bridger." "Not completely," Catherine responded in halting Shoshone. "Inside, still Catherine." Nimar considered this thoughtfully. "Two spirits in one body," she suggested eventually, "like medicine people sometimes have. Catherine and Ma'awe Naniweni. Together, this concept that she might integrate both identities rather than replacing one with the other provided unexpected comfort. Catherine wasn't erasing herself by adapting to Shoshone ways. She was expanding, becoming something more complex than before. As their third week in Pianoia began, a sense of restlessness spread throughout the community. The scouts who regularly patrolled the canyon approaches had reported no sign of pursuit, but neither had there been any word from White Eagle or the messengers sent to intercept him. "How much longer will we wait here?" Catherine asked Akando as they sorted medicinal herbs one morning. The elder's face revealed nothing of her own concerns. "Until it is safe to move, or until necessity forces us. The summer is still young, yet this place cannot sustain us indefinitely. The hunting grows poorer each day, and the gathered plants will soon be exhausted." Before Catherine could press for more details, a commotion at the valley's narrow entrance drew their attention. One of the scouts had returned earlier than expected, and from his rapid gestures and the reactions of those around him, he clearly brought significant news. Akando rose immediately and hurried toward the gathering crowd, Catherine close behind. The scout's report was delivered in such rapid Shoshone that Catherine caught only fragments. "Rider alone, approaching." But the electric tension that spread through the community needed no translation. "Someone comes." Nimar appeared at Catherine's side, her expression taut with excitement and apprehension. "One man on foot following our old trail." "White Eagle?" Catherine asked, hope surging within her. "Maybe," Nimar replied cautiously, "or maybe soldier scout. Elders send warriors to see." The next hour passed with excruciating slowness. The community's routine ground to a halt as everyone awaited identification of the mysterious visitor. Children were gathered into the central area, and those with weapons positioned themselves at strategic points around the valley's perimeter. Finally, a distinctive bird call, the signal established for friend, echoed from the canyon entrance. Moments later, a small party emerged from the narrow passage, surrounding a single figure that Catherine instantly recognized despite his trail-worn appearance. "White Eagle!" she cried out, restraining herself from running to him only with great effort. The scout looked exhausted, his clothing dusty and torn, his face leaner than when he had departed nearly a month earlier. Yet his eyes were alert, scanning the gathered community until they found Catherine. He acknowledged her with a brief nod before being escorted directly to the elders' council area. "We must wait," Akando instructed, noting Catherine's impatience. His news is for the council first. Then we will hear what concerns us." The council's discussion with White Eagle continued for what seemed an eternity. From the serious expressions and occasional raised voices, the news was clearly significant and potentially troubling. Catherine occupied herself by helping prepare a substantial meal for the returned scout, assuming he had traveled far with little sustenance. When White Eagle finally emerged from the council meeting, he accepted the offered food with gratitude, but insisted on speaking with Catherine and Akando immediately, even as he ate. "The situation has grown more dangerous than we anticipated," he began, without preamble, as they settled beside a small fire. "The army is convinced that Shoshone raiders were responsible for the Fort Bridger massacre. They've expanded patrols throughout the region and are threatening to force all Shoshone back to the reservation, even those with special permissions to remain outside its boundaries." "How did you find us?" Catherine asked. "Did you receive the messenger's warning?" White Eagle shook his head. "I reached our previous settlement and found it abandoned. The signs showed a hasty departure, which concerned me. I backtracked carefully until I encountered one of our border guards who had been watching for me. He guided me to Tsetogar, where another scout directed me here." "But that's a lie," Catherine exclaimed. "There were no survivors except me, and I told White Eagle the attackers were disguised renegades." Akando nodded grimly, "Which suggests someone is deliberately falsifying evidence to blame my people, perhaps the same ones who committed the massacre." The implications were staggering. If someone was actively working to frame the Shoshone for the attack, someone with enough influence to be considered a reliable witness by the army, then the danger to both the Shoshone community and to Catherine herself was far greater than they had initially believed. "What about White Eagle?" Catherine asked, sudden fear clutching at her heart. "If he's returning to find us with information about the real attackers, he may walk into grave danger." Akando confirmed this possibility with a solemn nod. "I have sent another message to the meeting place, but there is no certainty it will reach my grandson before he reaches the empty settlement." She gazed up at the circular opening high above them. "For now, we are safe in Pianoia. Few outside. The Shoshone know of this place, and those who do respect its sacred nature. We will remain here while we gather more information and determine our next steps." As darkness fell over the hidden valley, Catherine sat with Nima near the spring, watching stars appear in the circle of sky visible through the stone opening. Despite the beauty of their sanctuary, she couldn't shake a growing sense of foreboding. Somewhere beyond these protective canyon walls, forces were aligning against both her newfound community and the only person who connected her to her previous life. The sanctuary they had found might prove temporary indeed if those forces discovered their location. Yet as she looked around at the resilient people who had accepted her, however reluctantly, into their midst, Catherine felt a strange new emotion taking root alongside her fear. It wasn't quite hope, not with so many threats looming. Rather, it was a quiet determination that echoed the steadfast spirit of the Shoshone themselves, a resolve to face whatever came next, not as a helpless victim, but as Ma'awe Naniweni, the wise flower they had named her. Life in the hidden valley of Pianoia quickly settled into a rhythm dictated by necessity and caution. The Shoshone were accustomed to adapting to challenging circumstances, and within days the rocky enclosure had been transformed into a functional temporary settlement. Brush shelters were reinforced with stone foundations to withstand the unpredictable mountain weather. The small spring was carefully channeled to create both a drinking source and a separate area for washing. Food-gathering parties ventured out regularly, always returning before nightfall with whatever sustenance the sparse landscape offered. For Catherine, these days brought an acceleration of her education in Shoshone ways. With the immediate pressure of travel behind them, Akanda resumed formal language instruction, pushing Catherine to master more complex vocabulary and sentence structures. The elder was a demanding teacher, but Catherine's aptitude surprised even herself. Perhaps it was the constant immersion, or perhaps the stakes involved. But Shoshone words and patterns began to lodge in her memory with increasing ease. Your tongue learns quickly for a Taibo, Akando commented 2 weeks into their stay at Moonwater. Soon you will dream in our language. That prediction came true just 3 nights later, when Catherine awakened from a vivid dream in which she had been conversing entirely in Shoshone with her father back in Boston. The experience left her shaken, not just because of the seamless language transition, but because it marked another step away from her former identity. Who was she becoming? Some days, when she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the springs, still waters, she barely recognized the copper-skinned, dark-haired woman who stared back at her. The walnut dye on her skin needed periodic renewal, but even without it, weeks of sun exposure had darkened her naturally fair complexion. Her movements, speech patterns, even her thinking had begun to shift in subtle ways. Nima noted these changes with approval. "You become like Shoshone woman," she observed one afternoon as they gathered piñon nuts together on the valley's western slope. Their friendship had deepened through shared responsibilities and the gradual erosion of language barriers. He turned to his grandmother. "You chose well in coming to Pianoia. The soldiers have searched much of our traditional territory, but they consider these particular canyons too difficult and remote to justify exploration. For now," Akando qualified, "their persistence may eventually lead them even here." White Eagle acknowledged this with a grim nod before focusing his attention on Catherine. "You have changed," he observed, studying her darkened complexion and native clothing. "The transformation is convincing, especially at a distance." "I have learned much in your absence," Catherine replied in Shoshone, earning a surprised lift of White Eagle's eyebrows. "Her tongue learns quickly," Akando confirmed with a hint of pride, "and her spirit adapts well to our ways." White Eagle seemed pleased by this report, but his expression soon darkened again. "I discovered who has been falsifying evidence against our people," he said, his voice lowering. "There is a man in Green River, a businessman named Josiah Crawford, who has been providing sworn statements to the army that he witnessed Shoshone raiders attacking the fort." Catherine frowned in confusion. "But that's impossible. There was no one named Crawford at Fort Bridger. I knew every civilian there." "Exactly," White Eagle confirmed. "Crawford claims he was visiting the fort on business, was wounded during the attack, and barely escaped with his life. But his description of events contains details that don't match what actually happened." "But why would he lie about such a thing?" Catherine asked, struggling to make sense of this development. Akando's weathered face revealed no surprise. "For the oldest of reasons, greed. This man has interests that would benefit from our removal, does he not?" White Eagle nodded grimly. "Crawford owns mining interests throughout the territory. He's been lobbying the government for years to open portions of Shoshone land to prospectors. There have been rumors of gold and copper deposits in these mountains." With the Shoshone blamed for a massacre, Catherine concluded, the army would have justification to force them completely onto the reservation, opening these lands for mining claims. The full scope of the conspiracy unfolded in Catherine's mind with sickening clarity. Crawford had orchestrated the massacre not just to eliminate potential witnesses to his illegal prospecting activities on native lands, but to manipulate the army into clearing the Shoshone from land he coveted for mining. This Josiah Crawford, he was one of the attackers, she asked. Perhaps, though I doubt a businessman would dirty his own hands, White Eagle replied. More likely he hired men to do the actual killing, then fabricated his story of survival to direct blame toward the Shoshone. We must tell the army the truth, Catherine exclaimed. I'm a witness. I can testify that the attackers were renegades disguised as natives. Ikando placed a restraining hand on Catherine's arm. Consider carefully, child. Your testimony against a respected white businessman would carry little weight. Without evidence beyond your word, many would simply assume you had been held captive. So long that you began to sympathize with your captors. My grandmother speaks wisely, White Eagle agreed. Crawford has established his version of events as truth in the minds of both the military and the territorial authorities. Challenging that narrative would place you in grave danger, not just from Crawford and his associates, but potentially from settlers seeking vengeance for the massacre. Then what can we do? Catherine asked, frustration evident in her voice. Simply allow this man to profit from murdering my fiancé and framing your people? No, White Eagle said firmly, but we must proceed with caution and gather evidence that even the most prejudiced white authority cannot dismiss. He reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew a folded document. I managed to obtain a copy of Crawford's sworn statement describing the attack. It contains specific details about the raiders and the events, details we can potentially disprove. Ikando studied her grandson with evident concern. You risk much by involving yourself in this matter. Your position as a government liaison would be forfeit if your true allegiances were discovered. My position means nothing if my people suffer because of these lies, White Eagle responded. Besides, there is more at stake than just Shoshone interests. He turned to Catherine. While at Fort Laramie, I made discreet inquiries about your father in Boston. It was difficult without revealing your survival, but I learned he still lives, though his health continues to decline. This news, the first connection to her previous life since the massacre, hit Catherine with unexpected force. Her father still lived, someone who shared her blood, who had known her before all of this began. The possibility of returning to a semblance of her former life suddenly became concrete rather than theoretical. Yet, surprisingly, the prospect brought as much uncertainty as comfort. After weeks of immersion in Shoshone culture, the thought of returning to white society seemed almost as foreign as the Shoshone ways had initially appeared. What are you thinking, Ma'awe Naneweni? Ikando asked gently, using Catherine's Shoshone name. Catherine struggled to articulate her conflicted feelings. I don't know, she finally admitted. A month ago I would have given anything to return to my own people, but now you walk between two worlds, the medicine woman observed, and neither feels entirely yours. Before Catherine could respond, a commotion near the valley entrance drew their attention. One of the perimeter guards was approaching rapidly, his expression urgent. He spoke quickly to White Eagle in Shoshone, riders approaching the lower canyon. White Eagle translated grimly. A large party, at least 15 men. In that moment, Catherine made her decision, drawing on everything she had learned, her education, her time with the Shoshone, and her understanding of both worlds. She proposed a daring plan. She would not hide in the shadows while others determined her fate. She would use her unique position between worlds to expose Crawford's lies and protect those who had sheltered her. 3 weeks later, Catherine Blackwell stood before the territorial governor, her father at her side. She wore a proper Boston dress again, but around her neck hung the protection amulet White Eagle had given her. Behind her sat several Shoshone elders, including Akando and White Eagle, their presence unprecedented in such proceedings. With irrefutable evidence gathered through a carefully orchestrated plan, documents bearing Crawford's handwriting found at the massacre site, testimony from a remorseful hired gun, and her own compelling witness account, Catherine systematically dismantled Crawford's false narrative. The territorial governor had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. Crawford was arrested, and the military orders against the Shoshone were rescinded. In the years that followed, Catherine Blackwell became known as the Woman of Two Worlds. She established a school near the Wind River Reservation, where both native and white children learned side by side. She never married, but she counted Nima and White Eagle's children as her family. And when she published her influential book on Shoshone medicine practices, she used both names on the cover, Catherine Blackwell and Ma'awe Naniweni. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Each week, we bring you extraordinary tales of courage and understanding across cultural divides. What historical story would you like to hear next? Let us know in the comments below.